My brother looked me dead in the eye, blocked the doorway with his arms crossed, and said, "This is a company, not a charity. You're finished." I was standing there in the parking lot with my 7-year-old son's hand in mine, smelling the food my own father taught me to cook, while being told I wasn't family enough to walk inside. Through the glass, I could see my sister at the register, my cousins in the kitchen, my nephew bussing tables, all moving around in a restaurant that was supposed to be our shared inheritance. And there I was, the one who used to wake up before sunrise to prep with Dad, being treated like some stranger off the street. Ethan thought that was the end of my story. What he didn't realize was that moment, right there on the sidewalk with my kid asking why Uncle Ethan wouldn't let us in, was actually the beginning. Because a year later, after starting with almost nothing, I wasn't just feeding half his customers from a bright yellow food cart down the street. I was sitting across from his business partner, signing papers to own a stake in the very place he used to slam in my face. To understand how messed up that day was, you have to know how this restaurant started. My dad, Marcos, built it from a tiny Hole Juan spot where he did everything himself: prep, cooking, dishes, even mopping the floors after midnight. Both my brother Ethan and I grew up in that kitchen, standing on milk crates so we could reach the counter and roll tortillas next to him. When we got older, Ethan followed this serious path: culinary school, chef whites, the whole thing. I chose art, design, and working with Dad in the early mornings, learning the recipes and little tricks he never wrote down. Dad always told us the place would be ours together one day, that the family business was meant for both of his sons. But when he got sick, Ethan started whispering in his ear about how I wasn't committed, how I cared more about doodling logos than running the line. While I was sleeping in a hospital chair next to Dad in his final weeks, Ethan was in some lawyer's office, convincing him to rewrite the will. By the time Dad passed, the papers were signed, the restaurant was legally Ethan's, and I was left with nothing but a box of old kitchen tools and a polite invitation never to come back. For the next 3 years, my life was spent staring at that restaurant from across the plaza, folding other people's clothes for minimum wage at the laundromat. Every lunch rush was torture. I'd step outside to drag trash bags to the dumpster, and the smell would hit me first: roasted peppers, grilled meat, fresh tortillas, everything my dad taught us to make. Through the glass, I'd watch the line snake past the host stand, see Sophia joke with customers, catch glimpses of plates I knew how to cook blindfolded. But for me and my kid, it was like that place didn't exist. On the walk home, Jake would look up at the glowing sign and ask, "Dad, why can't we eat at Uncle Ethan's? It smells so good." What was I supposed to say? Because your uncle convinced your dying grandfather you weren't good enough to inherit his life's work? So I lied. I told him we were saving money, that we'd grab something cheaper at home, and then I'd heat up canned soup in our tiny kitchen while he stared out the window toward the plaza. Every shift, every question just hammered in the same thought: Ethan had stolen our place at that table. The thing about life is, sometimes the spark you need shows up in the most random aisle of the cheapest store. It was a slow afternoon about 4 months ago. Jake and I were at the bargain market, counting coins to see if we could afford a bag of rice and some vegetables. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me say, "Marcos's boy?" I turned around, and there was Mr. Hernandez, the produce supplier who used to deliver crates of fresh tomatoes and cilantro to Dad's back door. He looked a little older, a little slower, but his eyes went straight to Jake and then back to me, like he was putting the years together. After a second, he leaned in and said softly, "Your empanadas were always better than your brother's. You know that?" I laughed it off, bitter more than proud, and told him I was folding clothes now, not frying anything. He lowered his voice and said his nephew ran a food truck commissary, and there was an open spot if I ever wanted it. I shook my head and muttered, "With what money? I make $12 an hour." Before I could say more, Jake tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Dad, maybe you can make those cheese things Grandpa taught you again." That night, after we dragged our bargain groceries up the stairs, I couldn't stop replaying what Mr. Hernandez and Jake had said. Those two voices, one from my dad's past and one from my son's future, were saying the same thing. You can cook. You always could. I dug into the old cardboard box Ethan handed me the day he took over my so-called share of the family legacy. Under dented mixing bowls and a cracked cutting board, I found it. Dad's stained, beat-up recipe notebook. When I opened it, his handwriting hit me like a punch to the chest. There were the empanadas, the breakfast burritos, the salsas, but also little notes in the margins. Add a splash of vinegar here when tomatoes are weak. Never rush this step. Flavor lives in the slow parts. On some pages, he'd written my name. Teach this to him when he's ready. I sat there at the kitchen table, tears on the paper, and realized Ethan might have taken the building, but he didn't have this. Within a week, I signed a tiny commissary lease, nothing fancy, just a prep kitchen and a parking spot. I used my tax refund to buy the ugliest old food cart I could find. Jake and I spent a weekend scrubbing that cart until the metal actually shined again. Then we painted it bright yellow with cheap paint that dripped down the sides. Like sunshine, Jake said, stepping back with his hands on his hips, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. We started simple, breakfast burritos and strong coffee, parked outside a construction site 3 blocks from Ethan's restaurant. The first morning, I was terrified nobody would show up, but a couple of workers walked over, squinting at me, and one of them said, "Hey, aren't you Marcos's kid?" He took a bite, froze, then nodded slowly. "These taste like your dad's," he said. "Better, actually." Word spread faster than I could have planned. By the second week, nurses from the medical center were swinging by after night shifts, and office workers were calling in orders on their lunch breaks. Within a month, our little yellow cart had a whole rhythm. Mornings at the construction site, lunch in Mr. Martinez's auto shop lot, late afternoon snacks near the community college. People started planning their day around where we'd be parked. They recognized the color before they saw the sign. From my afternoon spot, I could see Ethan's restaurant across the way. The line that used to curl out the door was now a couple of tourists and the occasional stranger. The regulars, the people who grew up on my dad's food, were standing in front of my cart instead. One Thursday during the dinner rush, Sophia finally crossed the street. She stood in line like everyone else, arms folded, eyes bouncing between me and the cart's menu. When she reached the window, Jake handed her the order he already knew she'd want: no cilantro, extra salsa verde, just like Dad used to remember. She sighed and said, "Ethan thinks you're being unfair, stealing customers like this." I glanced at the 15 people behind her, Mr. Hernandez's nephew, Jake's teachers, the vet clinic crew. I slid her plate across and said quietly, "Tell Ethan he's welcome to buy dinner. I take cards and cash." Sunday evening, right before the dinner crowd, Ethan finally showed up in person. I saw the black SUV first, polished to a mirror shine, pulling into the lot like it owned the asphalt. Dad's old logo was wrapped around the sides, the same design he and I had doodled on a napkin 20 years ago, now stretched across a car I could never afford. Ethan stepped out in a tailored shirt, scanned the line at my cart, and walked over like he was about to fire an employee. "We need to talk about boundaries," he said, loud enough for the first few customers to hear. "You're confusing people. This is hurting the family brand." I kept flipping tortillas, letting the smell do half the talking. "Customers aren't confused," I said. "They know exactly what they're buying. Food that tastes like Dad's before you started cutting corners." His face flushed red. He leaned in, using his height the way he always did when we were kids, like he could physically press me back into place. "You're disrespecting him," he snapped. "Lying about adjustments, poisoning the community against my restaurant." I pulled my phone from my apron and showed him a photo I'd taken. A line 15 people deep at my cart. Sunday night. "Tell me," I asked quietly, "when was the last time your place looked like that?" He didn't answer. His jaw just locked, and something in his eyes shifted from offended to scared. When brute force didn't work, Ethan switched to business mode. He exhaled slowly, straightened his shirt, and dropped his voice like we were negotiating a deal. "Look," he said, "I'll pay you $2,500 a month. Close this cart, come work as a line cook for me, and we'll stop this nonsense." I almost laughed. Between breakfast, lunch, and regular orders, I was already making more than that. And he knew it. "I'm not selling Dad's recipes back to the guy watering down his salsa and buying pre-made tortillas," I said. For a split second he went pale. He hadn't realized I knew. Customers talk, suppliers talk, and in this neighborhood, nothing stays secret. His eyes narrowed. "Fine," he said. "If you want to play it that way, I hope all your paperwork is perfect. Permits, parking, health inspections. The city can be very strict. I've got friends downtown who don't like unlicensed competition clogging their streets." He tried to say it casually, but the threat sat there between us like grease on water. I told him my permits were valid and that Martinez was happy to have me in his lot, but my stomach dropped. Ethan never bluffed. If he said he had connections, he planned to use them. That night, after we closed up and I got Jake to bed, I sat at our wobbly kitchen table with my laptop and a cardboard box full of folders. If Ethan wanted to come at me through the city, I was going to meet him with every paper in order. I spread everything out: business license, food handler certification, health inspection reports, insurance policy, commissary agreement, parking deal with Martinez. Line by line, I checked dates, signatures, renewal notices, making notes where I needed reminders. My license was current. My certification had more than a year left. The health department had given me a perfect score just 5 weeks earlier. By the time I finished copying everything, filing the originals in a cheap fireproof box under the bed, and emailing digital scans to myself, it was almost 2 in the morning. I showed up at the construction site on 4 hours of sleep and started the breakfast rush like normal. At 8:15, a woman in a city uniform and a clipboard walked up and introduced herself as a health inspector. "There's been a complaint about your cart," she said gently. "Afraid I'll need to do a full inspection." She was thorough. She checked temperatures with a digital thermometer, watched me wash my hands, looked at how I separated raw and cooked food, opened refrigerators to read every label and date. The line of hungry workers behind her started getting restless. But Carlos, the foreman, told everyone to relax. "Somebody's scared of real competition," he joked loud enough for her to hear. When she finally finished scribbling on her clipboard, she closed it and gave me a tired smile. "Everything looks excellent," she said. "Honestly, cleaner than most full kitchens I see. This complaint was malicious. Document this visit in case there are more." As soon as the rush died down, I called Mr. Hernandez from the commissary sink, told him about Ethan's threats and the inspection. He listened quietly, then said he knew a small business lawyer who gave free first consultations and that I should talk to her before Ethan's next move, not after. A few days later, I saw Sophia again at Martinez's shop during the lunch rush. She didn't march up like last time or come in hot with Ethan's complaints. She stood off to the side, hands wrapped around her lanyard, watching me serve orders with this tight, nervous look on her face. When the line finally thinned, she stepped up to the window and asked if we could talk. Her voice was quieter than I'd heard in years. She said Ethan planned to report me next for operating without proper insurance, trying to get the city to shut me down on safety grounds. Then she looked me straight in the eye and admitted she knew I had insurance because she'd overheard me talking about it with Martinez weeks earlier. "I'm telling you so you're not blindsided," she whispered. When I asked her why she was suddenly helping me after defending him for so long, her jaw clenched. She finally confessed she'd been managing the restaurant's books and had seen Ethan skimming money, cutting ingredients, and paying himself bonuses while everyone else stayed at minimum wage. The next morning, Ethan decided to get physical again. When I pulled into the construction site at dawn, his black SUV was already parked right where my cart usually went, blocking part of the access lane. He was sitting there with a stack of discount coupons for his restaurant, ready to hand them out to every worker who arrived. I didn't argue. I just set up 25 feet away and started cooking. Carlos walked over to Ethan's window, pointed at the blocked entry, and told him to move or get towed. When Ethan finally peeled out, the guys actually clapped and lined up at my cart instead. That night, after Jake fell asleep with half an empanada still on his plate, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my phone like it might bite me. Sophia's words kept looping in my head. David doesn't know. For years, I'd told myself Ethan's mess was their problem, and I should just focus on my cart, my kid, and my peace. But the truth was, that restaurant still carried my dad's name, his logo, his story, Watching Ethan bleed it dry while blaming me for hurting the brand made something snap. Before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed the restaurant and asked to speak with David Torres about a business concern. Instead, a calm woman's voice answered and introduced herself as Rebecca, his wife, and the one who handled the finances. I took a breath and said, "I think there are things you and David need to see." She went quiet, then asked if I could meet her at a coffee shop near the restaurant the next afternoon somewhere away from Ethan. I showed up 15 minutes early, clutching Dad's recipe notebook and a folder of printed notes like a shield. Every part of me wanted to bolt, but I forced myself to sit in the corner, facing the door. Rebecca arrived right on time, tall, putty together, with that look of someone who's had to clean up other people's messes for a long time. She shook my hand firmly and got straight to it. "Tell me why you called." So I did. I told her how Ethan switched from fresh tomatoes to canned, from block cheese to pre-shredded, from fresh tortillas to frozen, how prices kept climbing while portions shrank, how long-time cooks were fired for arguing about shortcuts, and how customers were quietly drifting away. I slid Dad's original recipes across the table next to photos of current plates and menu prices. As she compared them, her expression hardened. "Ethan told David the restaurant was stable," she said, "but the numbers have been off." By the end of our talk, she promised to pull every invoice, every bank statement, every expense Ethan had touched. The fallout hit faster than I expected. 3 days later, just after dawn prep at the commissary, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. It was Rebecca. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge under it. She told me she'd gone through months of records, and what she found matched everything I described, and then some. Personal car payments logged as delivery costs. Luxury watches buried under kitchen equipment. Vacations written off as menu research trips, all while food quality dropped and staff stayed stuck at rock-bottom wages. She and David had confronted Ethan the night before with the printouts. There was yelling, denial, then silence when he realized the math didn't lie. "David is done letting him run things alone," she said. Then she surprised me. "He wants to talk with you, not as Ethan's brother, but as the person the community clearly trusts with Marcos's food." Sitting across from David a week later, signing papers that gave me a real stake in the business my brother swore I'd never touch again, felt surreal. I didn't win in some movie way where Ethan gets dragged out in handcuffs and everyone claps. Real life is messier. He kept some ownership, had to answer to real oversight, and watched his untouchable throne turn into a regular chair at the table. I kept my yellow cart. I kept cooking Dad's recipes the way he taught me, slow, honest, no shortcuts. Jake still does homework in the corner of the commissary while I prep, just like I did with my father years ago. Sophia comes by on her days off, sometimes with a bag of fresh cilantro and this guilty little smile. So yeah, the brother who told me I was finished now has to share the family name with the guy he tried to erase. If you were in my shoes, would you have gone to Rebecca or just walked away and built something completely new?